Yo, what's going on, everybody? Shout out to Lions Den Boxing Community. It's your boy Fight Critic, and I'm here to give you guys episode 3 of the Suckapunch podcast. I pretty much dropped the Sunday because Sunday's my lazy day, and I'm sometimes too lazy to even get on here and even do this. I like keeping shit to myself. For those of you who will be catching this on the replay, shout out to y'all. Make sure that if y'all have any questions that y'all need to have answered, send those questions over to fightcritic@gmail.com. Once again, that is fightcritic@gmail.com. So, not really a lot to go into tonight. I mean, then again, yeah, there's a lot to go into. We're going to talk about the vsGGG versus Caleb Plant fight from last night. We're going to talk a little bit about the heavyweight division. We're going to talk about the rumors circulating between the Canelo Alvarez versus Gennady Golovkin rematch. We're also going to jump into the Charlo brothers and the fight that they had a couple weeks back, since I didn't really get a chance to cover it. We're also going to look at the proposed Crawford versus Khan fight, and then wrap it up. I'm going to break down and give you my preview / prediction of the upcoming Manny Pacquiao versus Adrian Broner fight that is going to be taking place. But first and foremost, before anything, I also want to let you guys know that boxing is in a weird fucking place right now. A lot of paid content is coming out of left field. But last night we got a really good fight on a free-to-air network, which was the Jose vsGGG versus Caleb Plant fight. Now, I got to give Caleb Plant his respect. I did not pick Caleb Plant to win this fight. I thought vsGGG was just going to beat him. Jose vsGGG is one of my favorite fighters, especially today, where I don't really have much of a list of favorite fighters. But he was one of the guys who I expected to make a lot of noise in the super middleweight division. And for Caleb Plant to go in there and fight the way he fought, was very, very smart. I thought he had a really good game plan. I thought he did slow down a bit, and I think if it wasn't for the 2 knockdowns, it could have been a lot closer than it ended up being on the cards. I don't want to jump too much into my card because my card was very close. I had Caleb Plant winning by 2, which was 114 and 112, which if you map it out, that's a 6-6 fight. But because of the 2 knockdowns pretty much gave Caleb Plant the win. I'm not going to sit there and argue that it could have been a draw or it could have went the other way. It couldn't. I had no real way of giving Usyk more rounds than I could have. So I thought Caleb Plant fought really well. I thought he started out fast. He got the 2 knockdowns early in the fight, and he was just stronger early on. Now, he did fade later in the fight. Usyk really stepped up the pressure, but I think his early investment into the body shots is pretty much what allowed him to create more breathing space later in the fight, especially when Usyk started to land his jab and his straight right hand, and then the uppercut as well. But for Caleb Plant, really good left hook in the fight. He would hook with Usyk because he could tell that Usyk was dropping his right hand at times. That freed up the left hook at all times, and he couldn't miss with that left hook. So what happens next? Where does he go from here? In the 168-pound division, you have Callum Smith, who is the WBA champion and the lineal champion. You have David Benavidez, who is the WBC champion. You have Plant, now the newly crowned IBF champion, and you have Zona Ramirez, who's the WBO champion. What fights can there be made between all 4 of these guys? Well, for starters, even though Canelo Alvarez holds the regular super middleweight title, I don't foresee him, continuing to campaign at super middleweight. I think when you look at all 4 of the title holders right now, Callum Smith, I believe, is probably going to be in a fight, probably not going to be a crazy, competitive fight considering he came off the tournament. But I could see him taking a couple fights before really, finding another top-tier opponent again. The bout that intrigues me the most that can be made is the Benavidez versus Plant fight. I personally was looking forward to Benavidez versus Usyk, but because of this situation, Benavidez essentially fighting Caleb Plant is a really good fight. It's a unification fight. I think it's a fight that you don't necessarily have to make an excuse to make. Both these guys can pretty much fight as a co-main event to the main event of a bigger fight. Going forward into pretty much how this year plans out, I don't expect Zona Ramirez to be taking any difficult fights. Zona Ramirez's title reign has been very lackluster. I don't understand how certain people, they rate him so highly. He's had 1 really good win in his career so far, which is, the Abraham win where he won the title. But since then, he hasn't really fought anybody. So for Zona Ramirez to be continuing to, try to do his best to continue to, prove himself, and he has to really start to take, some chances here. If you're going to be this guy who's going to be a champion and you're going to be able to fight at all times and fight all newcomers, and you want to do this and you want to unify, then you need to stop fighting a lot of these filler fights, But, I've yet to see Zona really get he hasn't fought anybody in the top 5 since the Abraham win. So it's really hard for me to sit there and really, give this guy a lot of credit. Caleb Plant has a better win now than what Zona Ramirez has been doing so far in this division. For Jose Usyk, where does he go from here? I still think he's a game opponent in the division. I still think he's a very good fighter. He just got beat by the better man. And do I think that it rules out potentially fighting a rematch? Absolutely not. I think he would do well fighting in a rematch against Caleb Plant again. But I think he's pretty much game for any opponent. He's not locked down on any promoter, so he can pretty much fight on any platform. He was fighting on Fox. He was fighting on Showtime. He was fighting on Top Rank on ESPN. So this isn't a guy who has, to stick to one person in order to make a fight happen. He's pretty much, Not necessarily a free agent, but he's free to fight under a big promotion on a different platform. So we'll be looking forward to it. So in light of all that, I've also got to give a congratulations to Plant, because after the fight, he actually proposed to his girlfriend. I'm not going to sit there and pretend that I know their backstory, but I'm just going to say congratulations to that. You know, to win your first world title and to then take it up a notch and of course, propose to somebody, you know, that's classic shit that we see in you know, in sports. And, you know, we're all here for it. So to sit there and pretend that we're not here for it, you know, stop being a hater, essentially. So with all that's been going on, let's also talk about the heavyweight division. Now, of course, you know, the heavyweight division has been getting a lot of attention, especially with the way 2018 happened. You had exciting fights like Luis Ortiz versus Deontay Wilder. You had Tyson Fury's comeback in his fight against Deontay Wilder. You ended the year with Dillion White versus Derek Chisora, which was a good fight. You had a lot of guys who really fought, that really fought. So where do I see this division headed now? With Anthony Joshua looking for a dance partner for the April date when it comes to Wembley Stadium is where the big question mark lies. And of course, now you've got guys like Dillion White, Jarrell Miller, who seem to be the main people in play. Now, who should get the fight? Me personally, it really doesn't matter, because I think Anthony Joshua could beat both of them. So either or of them is the same level of opponent, in my opinion. He's already beaten Dillion White, and I think because he's beaten Dillion White, and I don't see that rematch being anything different, in my opinion, I would be more keen to watching Anthony Joshua fight Jarrell Miller if you had to make me pick between Miller and White. But as far as what's been going on with Dillion White, he's been very vocal to the media over the last couple of days, especially considering that he feels that he's been given a low ball offer to fight the rematch against Anthony Joshua. And when I think about the aspect to, you know, him getting that offer and him being vocal about it, this is the monster that Matchroom created. You know, this isn't Dillion White talking out of his ass or trying to do wrong by anybody. Matchroom created this monster with Dillion White. They're the one who bigged him up that he was this massive thing in the heavyweight division. They're the ones that overpaid him to take on certain opponents, like the Derek Chisora rematch. They're the one that pushed him into the limelight and made him a top bill fighter in the UK. So when you do that and you tell him to skip eliminators and to fight big money fights, you can't be mad if he wins those fights. You've put the promotion into him, and then you try to lowball him and he says this is some bullshit. You can't be upset at that. You can't in no way, shape, or form justify trying to pay him less in a fight that's bigger than his last fight. Let's just be honest here. Let's just throw out some hypotheticals. Is Anthony Joshua versus Dillion White a bigger fight than Anthony Joshua versus Derek Chisora? It is. Now, is it bigger because of the opponent? Yes. Does that mean that Derek Chisora is not as good as an opponent on paper than Dillion White? Yes. So if Joshua versus White rematch is a bigger fight than Joshua Chisora, White and Chisora just fought in a top bill fight, it's safe to say that Dillion White is bringing some type of exposure to this rematch. And if you want to pay him less than what he got in his last fight, then you're not really making much sense in how you're going about this. And it's just another reason why a lot of fans have become really upset and angry at what Eddie Hearn has done over the last year and a half. He's built Joshua to be this massive star in the UK, and he really is desperate to break into the US market. That's Eddie Hearn's goal. Eddie Hearn's goal is to market Joshua to be able to capture his stardom not only in the UK but transition it into the US. In order to do so, he has to fight the biggest name heavyweight in the U.S. That is Deontay Wilder. That is not an option right now because Eddie Hearn and his team fucked around all last year. And while they fucked around last year, Deontay Wilder went and fought Tyson Fury, who is probably the second biggest name in UK boxing for the heavyweight division. They fought and they both elevated themselves as far as their reach to audience, their viewership, the revenue surrounding it, to the point where more fans are interested in a rematch between them because of the controversy surrounding their fight. And at the same time, both men know that if they fight each other in a rematch and they win, whoever wins has a better negotiation, tactic to use against Joshua in a fight sometime later in the year. So you can't be mad because they're going to give you a better fight. They're not necessarily a better fight, but they're going to give you a top level fight, and both men know what's at stake. What's at stake is the right to sit there and say that you're the lineal heavyweight champ and to go into an Anthony Joshua negotiation, knowing that you can ask for a certain percentage, and they can't really argue much against it or try to, bait you or do shit like that. And because of that, Anthony Joshua is kind of left with the aspect too. He could either fight Dillion White in a rematch, a fight that he knows will make him a lot of money, or to take the chance and fight Jarrell Miller, which would probably be in the United States. The problem with it is that there are massive question marks surrounding fighting Jarrell Miller in the United States, mostly because Hearn hasn't done quite the marketing job around Jarrell Miller that he's done to Dillion White. He built Dillion White to be this fighter that takes on all comers. So Dillion White's supposed to be this guy who he fights everybody possible, even though he has not shown interest in fighting not only Luis Ortiz or Alexander Usyk. And for Jarrell Miller has been a fighter who pretty much is using Matchroom as an outlet to make sure that he gets paid, he gets fights, he stays active, and he knows he's in a position knowing that at any point in time he can get that phone call to fight Anthony Joshua. The problem with it is that Eddie Hearn pretty much knows that a fight between Joshua and Miller is probably not going to outdo Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder. And it's not going to outdo it because that is a truly genuine 50-50 fight that fans cared about. A lot of people were highly invested into Tyson Fury's return. A lot of people were highly invested into Deontay Wilder fighting Tyson Fury. Not many people are, in comparison, interested in Jarrell Miller and Anthony Joshua fighting each other. And because of that, you have the scenario that you have. You're going to have to pay Dillion White extra in order to make that fight because it's still a fight that you keep back in your pocket in the UK that can make you money. It's not going to transition well in the US, and you're probably going to make more and have bigger losses if you try to take Joshua to the US to fight Miller. It's not the right ideal opponent. Who I feel honestly should get the fight, probably won't get the fight, is Usyk. I think Usyk should get the fight because I think out of all three men, he's the most accomplished. That when I mean by all three men, I'm talking about, White, I'm talking about Miller and Usyk. I think Usyk is the most accomplished out of all three. I think he's also the guy that is coming off the most momentum as a fighter between all three. He knocked out Tony Bellew in a big fight. He is coming off of the fighter of the year, unanimously just across all boards. He had the best year out of anybody. It would seem ideal that you would move him up to fight Anthony Joshua at heavyweight. Yes, there's a lot of things that are lingering. The fact that he could potentially be outweighed by 50 pounds. He's probably going to be at a 3 to 4 inch height disadvantage, a 3 to 4 reach disadvantage. But he's probably a better opponent, and I would pick him ultimately to be a better opponent versus the other guys being considered for Anthony Joshua. And I don't think right now is the time for Eddie Hearn to risk putting Usyk in the ring with Joshua. I think that's a fight that he would like to keep in the back of his pocket. Should anything happen in the fall with a Fury versus Deontay Wilder winner. where if Eddie Hearn feels like he doesn't want to pay this guy this amount of percentage out of this fight, he always knows that he has Usyk in the backhand of his pocket. The only difference now is Usyk doesn't have a tournament this year to rely on to increase his knots. He's going to have to either continue at the consistency that he's been at, or he's going to drop off and dip a little bit and start to fight some of these guys that he was fighting back in 2014 and 15, when we really didn't really know much about Usyk. And this has been a growing trend, and it's sad that most guys usually off their fighter of the year usually take the next year off. They don't necessarily continue to have the same type of momentum going into the following year. But for me, I just think Usyk is the better opponent out of all three of those guys to take that fight in April. I don't see the problem with it. But I think Dillion White will end up getting the fight. I think he's going to end up getting the fight because too many people have hyped him up to be this guy who will fight anybody at any point in time. And for those reasons, I just think that Hearn created his own monster, which he has to deal with. And it's kind of funny. But at the same time, it can implode on him, because now you're going to have a guy who's angry, who wants what he's owed, and he didn't ask to be this person. You made him this person. So you're going to have to deal with it. Now, moving on to Canelo versus Triple G. There were rumored talks of a third fight being negotiated. Now, this came off of the strength of a rumored offer for Gennady Golovkin to join PBC. This was something that leaked through Keith Idek, who had mentioned that Al Heyman sat down with Gennady Golovkin by himself. Gennady Golovkin is now being managed by his wife, and what seems to be the talk is he virtually offered Gennady Golovkin a $10 million tune-up fight. I don't know where these figures are coming from personally. It is quite high of an investment to make in a fighter of Gennady Golovkin's age, where I think his better days are beyond him. I don't think that's the right type of money to be putting in front of him when you think about him as the fighter. But, get paid. I think at the end of the day, I'm always for fighters getting paid, and if that is the best offer for Gennady Golovkin to take, and if it comes with the aspect of him being able to fight consistent, fight, top-level opponents, then it's an option for him to take. Of course, he will be at somewhat of a limited resource, considering that his former foe, Canelo Alvarez, as well as another former foe, Danny Jacobs, will be in line and in sync with DAZN. So because of all that, he has to really think about, well, if he goes to PBC, he can pretty much kiss away potential rematches there. What he does do is he opens himself up to a potential fight with Jermall Charlo, a fight that I've been wanting for almost a year now. I think that that's honestly the best fight for him to take. I don't think he takes it next. I think he gets a showcase fight and he would take it. But there are also rumors of Gennady Golovkin signing an exclusive deal with DAZN, which would mean that he will probably be eating up a chunk of whatever's the budget for DAZN as well. I don't know how true that rumor is, but at the same time, DAZN looks like they are pretty much moving away from the aspect of trying to sign promotionals to them and moving slowly on exclusive fighters, much like what HBO was doing. I think this comes off the strength of knowing that a lot of the Matchroom shows just haven't transitioned for them. And what I mean by that is, outside of the World Boxing Super Series, Matchroom has not done much U.S. base with what platform they've been given with DAZN. Where on the flip side, you have Golden Boy Promotions, which managed to drive them up to a #1 best-selling app with the Canelo fight. And if they were to get Gennady Golovkin, you would almost automatically assume that DAZN would be trying to push for that third fight, because it's still a win-win. Nobody really loses in that, regardless of if Canelo wins the third fight, which I believe he will. He's still a fighter signed under them. And so is Gennady Golovkin. They can continue to pair them against other opponents. And then you have Danny Jacobs and Demetrius Andrade as well. So you have all these guys that are in all the same division, kind of pretty much in sync with the same person. You should, like I've been saying for a while now, there's no reason why DAZN shouldn't have an undisputed middleweight champion by the end of this year. You've got Canelo holding 2 titles. You have Danny Jacobs and Demetrius Andrade. All of them should be fighting each other. If DAZN does not have an undisputed champion by the end of the year, somebody has some explaining to do. And, of course, you know, with Oscar De La Hoya, De La Hoya often makes a lot of very risky moves at any point in time. You've seen this consistently as far as like when you look at how often he's, you know, been linked to certain fighters or linked to certain deals. He will often jump the gun. So I'm not shocked that, you know, he went out of his way to put into the news that he's been trying to get the 3rd fight, you know, virtually started in the negotiation process. And, you know, for him, for De La Hoya, it's a win-win. His fighter is getting paid, you know. He takes 30% from Canelo's purse when he fights. So if Canelo's going to be making $36 million for the next X amount of fights, Oscar is making a good chunk of change. He's basically pocketing a little over $10 million from Canelo Alvarez's paycheck. That's an obscene amount of money. But we'll see what happens there. Honestly, Gennady Golovkin can choose whatever platform he chooses to fight on. It won't make a difference to me, but I'm going to be very happy if he does fight on PBC, mostly because I get to shit talk, and I get to shit talk a lot of people. So let's talk. I mentioned Jamal Charlo, and let's jump into the Charlos. As far as like, they had their showcase fights in January, and it was a weird night. I thought Jamel got robbed versus Tony Harrison. I'm watching that fight, and I'm like, I could easily give Jamel 8 rounds here. You know, 9 if I pushed it. Tony Harrison, I thought the max I could give him was 4 rounds. Now, this isn't to discredit Tony Harrison as a fighter, because I still thought that, I said going into this fight, I thought it was a good fight. I thought Tony Harrison was the right type of opponent. I just didn't see him winning the fight. I thought that him getting, what was it? He got, 7 rounds? That's a stretch in my opinion. I thought Jamel controlled a lot of the aspect of the fights. Yeah, there was a couple of rounds where you could have gave him to Tony Harrison, but I just didn't think Tony Harrison fought his fight. I thought Jamel fought the better fight. So, yeah, it sucks. And I hope that he gets that rematch, because I think in the rematch, you're going to see Jamel fight better. Now, oftentimes when these kind of fights happen, they don't often see the guy who people felt was robbed win the rematch. In fact, it's the guy who got away in the first fight that usually wins that rematch. And we'll see what happens. I mean, it's to give us a pretty good idea of, was this just a fluke, or does Tony Harrison truly have Jamel Charlo's number? And with Jamal Charlo, it was really hard to give him that win against Korobov. I scored at 6-6, ultimately. I had it a draw. It just wasn't a good night overall for the Charlos. Matt Korobov came out of nowhere last minute and gave Jamal Charlo hell. And yeah, Korobov got hurt real badly in the 12th round, and he had to survive. I thought Charlo would have finished him off in the 12th round, but you know, spending a lot of those rounds, he hit a lot of sharp shots. He didn't look well on the front foot until the second half of the fight, and he was getting beat to the punch in the first half of the fight. I don't know if it's because he fought a last minute opponent. My, conventional wisdom says Korobov just was an opponent he wasn't prepared to fight. I really didn't have much to say afterwards. I thought that 6-6 was honestly the card that I could give it. I thought Korobov fought well, and I can't really argue anybody who felt that Korobov won. Now, what will happen between these two is I would like to see a rematch with them on the same card again. I don't know how ideal it is that Jermall Charlo and Matt Corbo fight again, but considering a lot of things that are going on the other side of the street, as what they would call it, I don't mind him taking the rematch and proving everybody that, you know, this was a fight that he was winning. But what needs to happen to ensure it's not a repeat? Well, I think with Jermell Charlo, I think mostly for him, he needs to just be himself, which is what has gotten him this far. And I think he needs to step on the gas a little bit against Tony Harrison. For Jermall Charlo, I think a full 10 to 12 week camp of him being prepared for Korobov is going to make a big difference. I think he's going to be more prepared if he fights him in a rematch next time. And I think if they do those two things, then I don't think there's going to be much of an issue. So hopefully we'll get those rematches in 2019. I fully expect them to fight those rematches. And of course, you know, speaking of interesting fights this year, Amir Khan once again does it. He leaves Kell Brook high and dry to go fight Terrence Crawford. Oh, what's good, Jeff? Shout out, bro. Amir Khan is fighting Terrence Crawford for the WBO welterweight title. What do I make of it? Not much. I think Terrence Crawford is going to beat the living shit out of Amir Khan. And when he beats the living shit out of Amir Khan after 4 rounds, when I believe the ass whooping starts, I get to come on here and I get to laugh once again. A lot of people think that I hate Khan. I don't. I just like seeing Amir Khan get beaten up. I just think that he has heart. He just has a really bad chin. And I think that for him, he would rather get knocked smooth out by anybody not named Kell Brook. And I've been telling people this shit for like 4 years. He doesn't want to fight Kell Brook because he knows a loss versus somebody who is a countryman of his. He's not gonna be able to live that one up. But he could take losses to everybody else. Nobody's really gonna care much about it. For Terrence Crawford, I know why Terrence Crawford is taking this fight. Terrence Crawford is taking this fight mostly because a lot of people are pretty much starting to realize that the fights that he's having right now at welterweight are not sufficient. And what I mean by they're not sufficient is compared to his counterparts and what they bring as far as to the table, he seems to be the odd man out. You know, Keith Thurman, Sean Porter, Errol Spence, those guys are all on the other side. Now, them trying to fight each other, yes, it is going to be difficult because all of those guys, they can all headline a fight. They can all put 10,000 plus in an arena, and they can all pretty much sell. So when you put them up against each other, somebody's going to have to lose and lose their audience. Somebody is probably going to lose really badly. Now, Keith Thurman and Sean Porter have fought each other. They both fought in a fight where it was in a venue where they put over 12,000 people in there. Both guys left the fight kind of elevated. Keith Thurman, we need to see how he looks coming back because he hasn't fought since. Is this going to be the same Keith Thurman that fought the last time we saw him out? That's the big clue here. Is this going to be a different Keith Thurman? And, you know, Keith is fighting in the same arena that he fought last time in. Where does that go? How does that translate? Well, it's translated because a lot of people still consider Keith Thurman to be a very, very big deal in the welterweight division. I still think that Keith Thurman is still probably the second best welterweight in the division. Arguably, you can make the case for him being the number 1 welterweight in the division. He's got the best quality of wins out of all the guys. Many people feel that Errol Spence is going to ragdoll him. It's a much harder fight than that. Much harder fight than that, in my opinion. I think when it comes down to Errol Spence, last year was the year that many people just wanted him to stay active, and you got what you wanted. You know, he fought the guys that you wanted him to fight so that he could stay active. Was it the best, you know, was the best opponents that we wanted to see him in? Not quite. I thought the Lamont Peterson fight was a good fight. The mandatory fight that he had to take against, who was it? Ocampo? Trash fight. But it was a fight that was enforced by a mandatory. But what you're starting to see with Errol Spence, his last 3 fights, they've all been top, garnered fights. Like last year he put almost 30,000 people in seats, which is nuts. And this year he's fighting his first fight of the year, albeit against Mikey Garcia in a huge venue. Errol Spence pretty much has the keys to his future in his hands. And because of that, many people are under the impression that he's the one that needs to give something up to fight Terrence Crawford. Terrence Crawford outside of Nebraska, it's hard for him to be marketed. He's done well, but every time that he's had a fight where he's marketed himself, on the flip side, what you've ended up seeing is his, progress be stymied. It sucks. It pisses me off because Terrence Crawford could be selling out stadiums all around the country. But every time he has a good fight, they move him somewhere he shouldn't be fighting, or they take away the momentum that he's supposed to have. They limit his audience, and now they're going to put him on pay-per-view. Now, the big reason why this pay-per-view is happening is because Bob Arum realizes that Errol Spence is going to find himself in an opportunity, and I've said this before, where he can dictate the terms to Terrence Crawford. And it's because the guy's been selling out more tickets. He's been garnering more attention. People are traveling to see his fights in New York. People are traveling to see his fights in Texas. And now he's going to be fighting in one of the biggest venues in, the U.S. as far as just capacity. That is a huge problem when you are Bob Arum and you are saying that you are making all these offers that are being turned down. That is a problem when you are Bob Arum, who is trying to make this fight on your terms. You cannot make these fights on your terms because your fighter's opponent is doing dramatically better than you. And that is why this Khan fight is here, because Khan still garners some type of audience, and he knows that Terrence Crawford looking good against Amir Khan in Madison Square Garden would somehow cut into this ability that he can go to the negotiation tables with Spence, or at least throw out something and make it seem like Spence just doesn't want the fight. In my opinion, I think as far as the way that this fight will continue to kind of play out, I think Khan will do as he does most times. He will look good early on, and then he's going to get clipped. And then once he gets clipped, that's when it begins. As far as Kell Brook, he's left out once again. Kell Brook just needs to go on with his life. Amir Khan is not going to fight him. And I've given up on the Khan Brook fight since 2016. 2015 was the best time for that fight. Both these guys were relatively top 5 welterweights. You had Kell Brook, who was an undefeated champion in the division. Amir Khan, had wanted the direct path to Floyd Mayweather, and I sat there and I said, if he fights Kell Brook in Wembley Stadium, beats him for a world title, that gets the attention of Floyd Mayweather. But nobody really thought that was really the thing when it came to Khan. They thought Khan had already done enough. And look at Amir Khan now. He's struggling against guys named Samuel Vargas. And now he's going to be fighting Terrence Crawford. And, for all the talk of this fight, Kell Brook really has to start looking at Eddie Hearn like, what the fuck, man? I can understand if Eddie Hearn couldn't get Khan into the ring when it came to Khan, not being with a promoter. But this guy signed to you. And 3 fights in, no Brook fight? If I'm Brook, I'd be pissed. What the fuck, man? Like, yo, like I get the aspect of Khan. Yeah, he's very difficult to deal with at times, but both of these guys are signed to you. There's no way that you don't push the needle here. Eddie Hearn is still going to get paid if Amir Khan fights Terrence Crawford. He potentially will probably be the co-promoter of that fight you know, which is a fight on pay-per-view, which Eddie Hearn has been saying pay-per-view is dead in the U.S. for quite some time. But we're not going to get into that hypocrisy. But how do you not make that fight? It baffles me. And if I'm Kell Brook, I'm pissed. I'm very pissed at my promoter. I've been trying to get this guy in the ring for what, 5 years now. Finally, we get this thing signed. No, the fight isn't as big as it once was, but, you know, maybe there's something salvaged there. You can't even fucking deliver me the fight. There are people who leave their promoters because they can't get certain fights. And I don't know why Kell Brook, I don't know, maybe it's because he's not as big as a name outside of his hometown, or he can't do that well as far as selling unless he has another big opponent. But Kell Brook should have honestly sat down with Hearn and said, yo, if you can't give me Amir Khan, let me know right now and I'll go elsewhere. You know? And, like, he can't really do much at the 154 division. You know, there's rumor talks about, who is it? He's going to potentially fight who? I saw it on Twitter earlier, but I think he's going to fight Jesse Vargas or something. There's a rumor fight. That's a decent fight. It's a crossroad type of fight, but it's not the fight that he wanted. And I think for Kell Brook, he's going to probably have to sell this fight as this big event for him, and it's gonna move the needle for him, and you know, create opportunities. It's not really gonna do much of that. It's just gonna be a fight between two guys in the lower portion of a division, especially at a time right now. You know, Jesse Vargas is coming off 2 back-to-back draws versus Broner and Thomas Delorme, and he's gonna be. And if they do end up making that fight, Kell Brook versus Jesse Vargas, it's definitely a fight that I could see Kell Brook losing. You know, Jesse Vargas isn't really no soft welterweight anymore. I thought he used to be soft, but he proved me wrong. You know, we'll see what happens, but hey, it is what it is there. I don't think it's going to be rather competitive for Terrence Crawford and Amir Khan. And at the same time, I think Kell Brook is really wasting his time at this point. And let's get to the main event. Let's talk about Manny Pacquiao versus Adrian Broner. This fight is at welterweight, I believe. But you know Manny Pacquiao, he doesn't often weigh in, you know, at the 147 limit at times. Usually Pacquiao's anywhere between 144 and 146. But, you know, Pacquiao's 40 now. Damn. I've been watching Manny Pacquiao fight since he was like 28, 27. Pacquiao's fucking 40 now. He's still fighting. It's bad. But I understand why he's fighting. In fact, Pacquiao went and he did an interview. Oh, he did a talk show on PBC. I can't call it an interview. And he talked about why he signed with PBC. And the reason why he said that he signed was because it was Al Heyman who was willing to take the opportunity to visit his stable of fighters to actually get them exposure. This, as a boxing fan, really shocks me, and it really pisses me off. You mean to tell me that Manny Pacquiao, the second richest boxer of all time, boxing's only 8 division champion, 6 weight world champion, you know, 5-time lineal champion, you know, a Hall of Famer, first ballot, all-time great, you know, hell of a fucking resume. You want to tell me that this guy who has given the sport everything, and not one big promoter was willing to take a look at his ability, his star power, his popularity, and wanted to market him and his fighters? I have a really hard time believing that, especially at a time like right now where there are so many platforms to watch boxing. Not one person except Al Heyman took the chance? How does Bob Arum not jump on an opportunity to do this? Bob Arum's been crying out for an Asian star in his stable. He thought he had it with Ryota Murata, but nah. He tried it with Zhao Shiming. Nah. He can't do nothing with Juris and Kajas. Why not look at what Pacquiao's been able to do in the Philippines? He's built a stable of fighters under his promotional deal. And it took him going to somebody we never expected him to go to sign for. And not many people are going to pay much attention to this, but you kind of have to give Al Heyman a lot of credit. Not because he signed Manny Pacquiao, but the fact that all this day we've always wanted Manny Pacquiao to stop fighting because we feel like he's somewhat going to continue to taint his legacy. And many people understood that Pacquiao had to keep fighting because of a lot of the tax situations he found himself in the last couple of years. Yet nobody's going to sit there and they're going to applaud this signing because Heyman is actually structuring to work with Pacquiao eliminating his debts. Nobody in boxing chose to do so. Not no fans, not no promoters. Nobody set up a fucking GoFundMe, but it took the one guy that the majority of people who fucking hate in this sport for no fucking reason to fucking help Pacquiao. Of all fucking people. I don't want to hear anybody make any fucking complaints. It took Al Heyman to help Pacquiao with his taxes and to look at the fact that he has a stable of fighters and say, hey, we're going to do our best to make sure your fighters get exposure. And it starts with this Adrian Broner fight. Adrian Broner pretty much has not lived up to the expectations that we set high for him a couple years back. It just seems like it's all been downhill since the Marcos Maidana fight. Now, every time Adrian Broner has suffered an embarrassing loss, he's always come back and he's been this sort of new version of Adrian Broner. You know, after the Maidana loss, when he bounced back and he beat Khabib, Alak Verdiev, proceeded to just try to be the same Broner afterwards, got beat by Sean Porter. You know, then after the Porter loss, he wanted to come back and prove that he was different, prove that he was better. And for many people, I mean, I probably got those fights reversed, to be honest, but for many people, a lot of us have grown tired of Adrian Broner. Many of us feel like he treats boxing like a side job. And when you look at what Adrian Broner has done in the sport of boxing, yeah, he's kind of treated boxing not very well. So that's why a lot of people are rooting for Pacquiao to beat him. I just don't think he throws enough punches to beat Pacquiao. That's just me, to be honest. I think Pacquiao, despite the fact that he's not the same fighter that he once was, he doesn't throw the same punches that he used to throw. He doesn't throw at the same velocity that he used to. He doesn't utilize the angles that he does. Pacquiao should still have enough in the tank to get Adrian Broner the fuck out of there, or at least beat him convincingly on a decision. Adrian Broner is not the type of guy who has transitioned well above 140 pounds. Adrian Broner over 140 pounds is not a good fighter. He's very slow. He doesn't throw enough punches. He doesn't make adjustments well. And most importantly, he doesn't really push the tempo. He doesn't really know when to switch things up. He just thinks that fighting and looking flashy and looking pretty is going to do enough. And sometimes it's not. That's what, that's what happened when he allowed guys like Mikey Garcia to dominate him. You know, Mikey Garcia dominated the fuck out of Adrian Broner. You know, Sean Porter dominated Adrian Broner. You know, Marcos Maidana dominated Adrian Broner. You know, we didn't see a real source of like urgency from Broner until he fought Jesse Vargas, where he really needed to dig in deep, and people were like, yo, Jesse Vargas is probably going to win this fight. And he bounced back and he got himself a draw. Not the most difficult decision. I didn't think that Jesse Vargas won it hand down. I thought the draw was respectable, but if Adrian Rose to take anything away from that fight, is to prove that there's still a part of him that still wants to be able to do this and prove people wrong. So why not use this as your fuel, especially going into a fight like Pacquiao? Because Manny Pacquiao is always going to fight with the same amount of level and intensity. It doesn't matter if you're talking about 22-year-old Pacquiao, 32-year-old Pacquiao, or an 88-year-old Pacquiao. Pacquiao is not going to fight as if he can't win. Unless he's fighting Floyd Mayweather, because Floyd Mayweather had that motherfucker looking lost. But yeah, I just think for Broner, like he needs to actually go out there and really put himself on the line in this fight. I think for Broner, he needs to throw a lot of punches. He needs to be a volume guy. You know, him fighting in a southpaw stance versus a southpaw is a nightmare for him, especially with Pacquiao. Pacquiao still got some sting on his left hand. For Manny Pacquiao, I think Broner just doesn't move enough to keep out of range. Pacquiao also is not going to be like out of any sort of like real reach disadvantage because Adrian Broner does not fight to take advantage of those things. You know, he kind of stays bunched in, throws these short shots and stays and tries to roll punches. And he leaves himself exposed at times. And I think Manny Pacquiao is going to find it relatively easy taking this fight. But if you know he proves me wrong and if he shows us something, then you know what? I'll be at fault. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. But that's ultimately how I feel about it, and that's ultimately how I'm going to end this episode 3. I will be back next week to talk about this fight. We'll also see what happens further on in the year. Then I probably won't be back after next week until we get another fight. Probably not till the Kovalev fight, the Kovalev versus Alvarez fight, or maybe not until Mikey versus Spence. But for this weekend, I think Pacquiao. I'm gonna say Pacquiao gets Broner out of there late rounds. I don't think I'm gonna dive too much into the method of the knockout, but I think what we're gonna see is a Pacquiao put on a very decent, good performance. I don't think you're gonna see Adrian Broner really react or make adjustments much. But that's all I have to say for this episode. I'm out of here. I really need to eat something. I'm really, really hungry. All right, later, y'all.